Well, the Eagles made it official and decided on their guy for Jalen Hurts quarterback coach. And even though you may be unfamiliar, why is he a great choice for the Birds offense? Meanwhile, Myles Garrett added another twist to his whole trade rumors to Philly, but Josh Sweat's cryptic message kind of suggests otherwise. So let's talk about that, why Howie Roseman may be set on a tight end, and one area the Eagles can't afford to make another mistake in. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? We're about 1 week away from NFL free agency starting, and man, if it's anything close to the lead-up, it's going to be wild. Of course, I don't know if we're talking about as crazy as last offseason with the whole Saquon Barkley madness, yet the hilarious part to me is that in just 1 year, what Saquon Barkley did to the New York Giants officially put an end to the offseason of Hard Knocks, with NFL Films sharing they couldn't find any takers after the Joe Schoen debacle last season.
Hopefully, you go out there, you see the market, and you say, you know what, I want to be here, and you give us a shout back.
All right, I appreciate you.
All right, Saquon, I'll talk to you.
Yeah, not necessarily painted in the best light, but thanks again to Joe Schoen and the Giants fans for Shayshawn Barkley because he is one of a kind and is actually filing for the trademark of Shayshawn Barkley to be used on merch and t-shirts and everything else. Which, speaking of Saquon merch, do me a favor and drop a like on this video because if this video gets over 4,000 likes, I'm going to give away a Saquon Barkley Super Bowl jersey on my next live stream. For the record, yes, I'll also be giving away the Nolan Smith signed helmet during that live stream then. So just make sure to subscribe and turn the notifications on so you don't miss out because, again, the news is just going to heat up. But over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've gotten updates on the Myles Garrett situation, where the Eagles' priorities are with Zack Baun, as well as some coaching updates and all kinds of other rumors.
I don't know what to believe anymore.
I don't blame you, but how about this? Let's start with the hard news first. Seeing as though the Eagles officially made their decision on Jalen Hurts quarterback's coach, after Adam Schefter reported that Bowling Green head coach Scott Loeffler was named the next man for the job in Philly. Now, in case you're not familiar with Loeffler, he was the head man the past 6 seasons while leading the Falcons to a bowl game in each of the last 3 years. In fact, he was doing so well that he actually got a contract extension worth $1.74 million just last season to be in Ohio long term. So yeah, it's definitely understandable that several people have been asking why would he give up a head coach job for a positional role. Look, it's not the only reason, nor do I think it's the main reason. It's still some sort of a factor, but I think this just goes to show how great of an owner Jeffrey Lurie is. Like, he deserves credit for never being afraid to go out and pay more money to bring in quality coaches. After all, at a salary north of $600,000 per year with Bowling Green, you gotta imagine the Eagles went over that amount. And for those wondering, not every team is willing to pay that amount for positional coaches. Granted, I'd argue he deserves it because it's not like he's coming in with zero experience. Since in case you're questioning his resume, Loeffler is 50 years old, has been an offensive coordinator at multiple schools, including Temple, as well as different stints in the SEC, and has previous quarterback coach experience with the Detroit Lions in 2008. Plus, let me just say this, if you were one of those that wanted fresh ideas to come into the Eagles offense, then Loeffler is certainly the guy that brings that. With his resume featuring coaching all different types of quarterbacks like Tom Brady, Tim Tebow, Chad Henne, and even Logan Thomas.
It's anti-Italian discrimination.
I will say that you're not wrong that it felt like we would be completing the Big Dom master plan of bringing in another Italian to the coaching staff. Heck, with Nick Sirianni, Vic Fangio, and even Kevin Patullo, they had quite a start. And there were rumors that Syracuse associate head coach Nunzio Campanelli might get the job, although the Birds ended up going with Loeffler. Former Bowling Green head coach became the first coach to ever be ejected after getting 2 unsportsmanlike conduct penalties in a game. It's not good, but I can only imagine what Big Dom is thinking because now he's got to corral Nick Sirianni as well as Scott Loeffler.
Yo, what the
Sorry, I'm having too much fun with this, but in all seriousness, I like this hire because he's got lots of experience calling plays, and one of the great play and scheme breakdown accounts to Honest NFL is a big fan, saying loads of his diagrams and offense have come from Loeffler's designs, while also echoing that this is a guy who understands the little picture aspects of the QB process, aka there's no fat or anything he gives or communicates to his players. It's distilled down to its purest form in a way that doesn't hamper any of the 4 chapters of a drawback.
Push this tempo today, man. Hey, push the tempo. Drive your football team. You with me? Drive them. Good, go, fast, fast. Get lined up. We are gonna fly around and we're gonna upgrade today. Reach for it. There it is, good. You got a bubble off the jet. You follow me? Let's go, go. Good, flat, overdrag. Love it, love it. Hey, Grant, I love it.
Like, honestly, this is one of the best situations Philly could ask for. Because now you've got Loeffler and pass game coordinator Parks Frazier, who have both been offensive coordinators and called plays. So while Kevin Patullo may be familiar with the players and Sirianni and the scheme, there's a lot of outside thought and knowledge that they can bring to the table to challenge the status quo. I don't know, I personally really like the hirings, but where would you say your confidence level is at with the recent hirings? Oh, also, the other one that should play a factor in your answer there is the fact that the Eagles are bringing back former assistant offensive line coach Greg Austin to replace losing TJ Paganetti. Remember, Paganetti was Jeff Stoutland's right-hand man who left to join Kellen Moore's squad in New Orleans. But the good news is that Austin had coached with Stoutland for 3 years on a past stint in Philly. So the fact that Stout clearly picked Austin to return and has experience with him previously has to be a great sign. Now, while there will be an Eagle returning in Austin, it's not very likely we see Josh Sweat in midnight green again, because there's now been multiple reports suggesting the market for Sweaty is going to outprice what Howie Roseman's willing to pay. Of course, yes, for those conspiracy theorists out there, it was very strange to see Sweat's response to a post about him not returning with 3 question marks, leaving many to assume he still believes there's a chance, it's just Howie might not feel the same.
The both of them. You know?
Oh my God.
For the record, let's not forget that last offseason, Sweat made an Instagram post essentially saying goodbye to everyone, only to then end up being re-signed and getting another year in Philly. However, if we go based on that roundabout analysis, then doesn't that mean that Josh is gone this year? Look, either way, the latest scoop from Diana Russini suggests there's several guys who might not be back.
Here's what some people are saying right now, that Howie's willing to move on from some of these guys because he's looking to make a big swing, and that big swing would be for Myles Garrett. Some of these guys that you think are a sure thing may not be sure things to return to Philly.
I would rather have Myles Garrett than Zack Baun.
Put it past Howie Roseman going after Myles Garrett.
Absolutely
no way.
Not.
Continue to build and build and build in the area that got them to the Super Bowl and in the Super Bowl's past, which is just
Jalen
to continue with it.
And Myles Garrett.
Could you imagine that? Wow. Look, but is Cleveland going to move him? At the end of the day, it's going to come down to that.
Okay, so technically the Stains are not budging, but there's still plenty of time. I mean, it's early March, especially with Myles Garrett responding to GM Andrew Berry's recent comments saying the door has been slammed shut and they're not open to any contract extension in Cleveland. So yeah, the odds of Howie pulling something off are higher than they were, but seriously, I mean, how high are we talking about? By the way, going back to Chase Daniels' comments real quick about Myles Garrett over Zack Baun, straight up, sure, Garrett is without question the better player. However, when it comes to Vic Fangio's defenses, stellar linebacker play is crucial. Again, it would be terrifying for teams to have to deal with Garrett on that D-line. But I'm sorry, with Nakobe Dean and Ben Van Surman coming off of injuries and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. still young in his development, the Eagles cannot afford to make this mistake again of letting their stud linebacker walk. By the way, for the record, I don't think they will because Howie has mentioned in the past about TJ Edwards. And I think most all of us recognized how big of a mistake that was, either in the moment or definitely after one season. So I'll say it again, the fact that Fangio's defense relies on stellar linebacker play and you have an all-pro in the building or basically in the building, there's no way in my mind. If it means that you lose Zack Baun, then you say absolutely not to Myles Garrett. Now, is it impossible to get both? No, but it's a little bit less likely. We'll just at least say that. Also, the other side to this is that some people have brought up how often is it that we see Howie telegraphing moves or letting him out too early. I mean, perhaps this is just smoke and mirrors and means nothing. Yet at the same time, the idea Garrett needs any more hype from an agent stirring this interest up is crazy because it's Myles Garrett. Still, having said that, just as a reminder, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn the notifications on because if we get this move or anything throughout free agency, I'll be going live to make sure to keep you posted. You know, Garrett did say he wants to play for a contender and it's not about the money to him, so even though I'm at about a 10 to 15% chance, I won't completely rule it out. After all, players do a lot to play for the Eagles, with Philly being one of the premier landing spots based on a player's poll. However, surprisingly, according to an NFLPA poll, the Eagles rank 22nd out of 32 teams when it comes to an average of facilities, nutrition, training staff, coaches, and other areas surveyed.
That's right, it stinks!
Okay, so hold on. On one hand, I didn't like seeing that report at first, although shout out to the Enquirer's Jeff McClain who pointed out that that poll was taken before the team had a chance to address some of those needs, with the biggest items being providing childcare on game days, prioritizing first-class seats for players instead of coaches, and staggering lunch times to avoid overcrowding in the cafeteria. FYI, right after that poll, the Eagles did actually upgrade travel with certain veterans and larger players flying in first class, along with apparently addressing the long lines in the cafeteria as well. Thus the reasons, if you go back to the report and listen to it, that the players said one of the big benefits of the Eagles organization as opposed to other experiences would be that leadership listens and then prioritizes those improvements. Now, on that note for improvements or changes, the good news is that the NFL doesn't sound like they'll be banning the tush push, especially because an outside report revealed that there were 0 injuries that resulted from the league's most unstoppable play. So just in case you had anyone arguing it was an unsafe play and that player safety was too important, well, they don't really have an argument anymore.
Did that go the way you thought it was going to go? Nope.
The other area that surprised many was the salary cap after it was announced that it was almost a 10% increase. And I'll save you the math, but that gives the Eagles about $19.5 million in salary cap numbers, assuming, after they take care of the draft picks and everything else, but $19.5 million. Granted, that's the 12th lowest amount in the league, and Howie Roseman did warn fans that things are going to look different this offseason. However, it's what the Birds are looking into for the draft that's telling. But before I get to that, I want to mention the sponsor of today's video, Underdog. Because as one of the official sponsors of the channel, you won't find any better promos, discounts, or bonuses than when you scan the QR code and use my code PHILLYSPECIAL. Plus, right now, when you do that, Underdog is offering a special pick in the lobby and up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Of course, with the NFL season done, there's fewer picks on that front. However, in honor of Luka Doncic becoming a Laker, Underdog is offering a Luka Doncic discount for every Lakers game for the rest of the regular season. Or if you're looking to test your luck in the NFL Combine, they've got several different picks or plays for the 40-yard dash, so good luck to you if you end up going with one of those. Whichever way you go, if you want to join the best option in fantasy sports, though, use my code PHILLYSPECIAL and get signed up. Oh, one more thing, if you're not in a location that offers Pick'em, you can still get signed up and join a draft league. Whether that's the NBA, March Madness, or even getting an early start on the NFL for next year, Underdog's got you covered. Again, just scan the QR code, use code PHILLYSPECIAL, and you can get up to $1,000 in bonus credit. Alright, so as fun as it would be to draft a guy like Abdul Carter from Penn State, that's just not going to happen. Yes, I know the report about his foot injury and potentially hurting his draft stock, but he's not falling far enough for Philly to make a move and go up and get him. But while I say that, the area I do think is becoming a lot clearer is drafting a tight end prospect. Since the Inquirer's Devin Jackson reported that the Eagles have done their homework on the tight end position, meeting with at least 5 guys and maybe more that haven't even been reported yet. Although it's Texas' Gunnar Helm who's been the focus so far, seeing that he's 6'5", 250 pounds, and said at the Combine that he models his game from Grant Calcaterra and Dallas Goedert. And honestly, at that size, Helm is a smooth route runner with reliable hands who's also surprisingly quick. Of course, for anyone curious, Helm is probably somewhere around a mid-round pick, so just keep that in mind, but I will say he's actually a pretty good blocker, so don't sleep on him for Philly. Having said that, given our new quarterbacks coach from Bowling Green and the insane pass-catching tight end in Harold Fannin, I had to get Eagles writer Anthony DeBona on to talk about tight end potentials and all the other news around the Birds. Gunnar Helm, shout out to Devin Jackson of the Inquirer, was saying that he's getting some interest, some possibility from the Eagles. Talked about Gunnar Helm did of relaying or kind of playing similar to Dallas Goedert or Grant Calcaterra, modeling his game that way. He didn't have the best showing in terms of the athleticism, but it's not the end of the world necessarily, but we're also not saying that this is like your starting tight end, everything else. Curious to get your takeaways, people that may be a little bit overblown, like, my gosh, we shouldn't draft this guy. Thoughts there, I guess, and just takeaways from Gunnar Helm. We'll get into the other tight ends as well.
So, I mean, with Gunnar Helm, if you watch his film, I don't think anybody thought he was going to be like a burner or anything like that at the Combine, but when that first attempt, when he ran a 4.94 or whatever it was, I even tweeted myself, I was like, that's certainly not ideal. And then he improved it a little bit to a 4.8 on the second attempt. So I think overall, I'm still pretty high on him. He's my third tight end in the draft, and I still think he's there. I don't really let the Combine drills knock players down too much in my rankings. If anything, it kind of just makes me want to go back and watch film and see if he really looked that slow on tape or if he looked that fast on tape, because sometimes this stuff doesn't even translate to the actual field. So in regards to Gunnar Helm, I think he's still just a really smooth player. His athleticism is more of like the way that he can cut and the way they can move after the catch, and not necessarily blazing past people, but getting enough to kind of wiggle past guys and move that way. He's still a very physical player, great blocker, tons of experience as a blocker. So I don't think it's not too much of a knock on him.
And that's also a great point that you bring up, because the blocking element sometimes is, I wouldn't say overlooked, but the first element is like, okay, what are the passing stats? What do they do on the field? That's what shows up early on the tape. And then, for you and others who dive into it a little bit deeper, it's like, okay, hey, let's take a look at how this guy can block and how he can perform there. So good point on Gunnar Helm. Curious just in general, though, like some other names that we can get into. Who's potentially stood out? Does it feel like this is potentially the draft that Howie Roseman goes for? Is it a Goddard replacement? Is it someone of the long-term future? And who might that be?
So one guy that I've kind of been tweeting about for the past couple of weeks, and I feel like his combat performance, even though he didn't do any of the athletic testing, but he did participate in the gauntlet drill and turned a lot of heads there, was Mason Taylor from LSU. And he's the son of Jason Taylor, nephew of Zach Thomas, from both former Dolphins players. So he has the NFL bloodlines. And he just showed, despite how big he is, he's 6'5", 240, 250, around that range. Another guy like Gunnar Helm with a ton of blocking experience. He's actually drawn comparisons to Dallas Goedert. If you go on his NFL.com draft profile, that's literally his pro comparison. So that right there should kind of intrigue Eagles fans regarding him. But just watching him go through that gauntlet drill is very smooth, his 10-inch hands really showed I think he dropped one pass and throughout the entire on-field workout. So 1.9% drop percentage in college. So just a reliable target with that experience blocking. And I think he really stood out at the combine as well.
I could definitely be intrigued. And obviously, meetings, visits, all that comes into play. We'll see more of that, even post combine, as far as guys who may get brought in for another visit, formal meetings for the Eagles top 30 and everything there, as people should be. If you're not already, make sure to follow Anthony at DeBone NFL. Keep you updated on everything on that side. The other tight end that I do have to bring up because potential ties, maybe to I guess he does have ties, but could end up being reunited with the Eagles quarterback coach in Scott Loeffler, Bowling Green. This dude is a pass-catching phenom, or was at Bowling Green. Thoughts on Harold Fannin? I mean, just what he did on the testing drills and maybe reunited with Scott Loeffler?
Yeah, so if you go back and watch Bowling Green, I tweeted about it as well. I just love the way that Scott Loeffler kind of utilized him, and now it's just kind of cool that he's going to be bringing that offensive scheme because he was the one that, even though he was a head coach at Bowling Green, he also called plays and kind of had the offense going there. So the fact that he might bring some of these unique ways that they use a guy like Harold Fannin Jr. at Bowling Green to Philadelphia is really fun because despite that he's just the quarterback coach, he is certainly going to have some input in the offensive team meetings and kind of influence in that regard in terms of, hey, I tried this play there, I had success with it. So just like I tweeted about it, you can go and look at it. It's about a minute and a half long video of just all the different ways that they use Harold Fannin Jr., where he was a wildcat quarterback. He was in the backfield running the ball like a running back. He was getting passes in motion. He was getting those Travis Kelce little forward pitches in the red zone. He was out wide in the slot. He's kind of a do-it-all tight end, and a lot of people kind of criticized his 40-yard dash performance. He only had a 4.71 40-yard dash, which obviously isn't ideal considering that he's already an undersized tight end. That's 6'3", 241, but another guy on the field wasn't really much of a burner, but he's just really savvy route runner for a tight end, and he has that physicality after the catch, which is still should translate to the NFL because I compared him to Jonnu Smith and another guy that was similar body type, slightly faster at the combine, but similar role in the NFL where does a lot of damage after the catch, can be utilized in a lot of different alignments. And I think that's would really translate well as a potential day 2 target for the Eagles.
Last question here on Fannin real quick, just because, a few people have mentioned, or I've seen the comment being made. Of course, you go back to blocking. Can they do that? Some tight ends we've seen in college, say, oh, well, that's their big weakness, right? Or that's the scouting report. They're not going to be able to block well. And you see them make a transition, whether it's coaching, whether it's getting stronger, whether it's a combination of that or just scheme. They develop the blocking technique. They're able to perform a lot better than they did in college. Now, some don't pan out, obviously. But any concerns from what you've watched the tape on Harold Fannin and his blocking ability or lack thereof?
I don't think so. And I feel like I've seen quite a few people that claim they're draft experts that say they're questioning his blocking ability because he's so small, but he actually was utilized in kind of a fullback role at times. He was utilized as a blocker quite a bit, not to the extent that Gunnar Helm and Mason Taylor were, but he actually had one of the higher blocking rankings as far as run blocking for Pro Football Focus, as far as I know people don't always take those grades very seriously, but if you do want to look at that as a way to quantify it, then if you don't have the time to really watch tape, he is one of the higher run blocking tight ends in the draft. So I think he's just fine there. And bringing him to Philadelphia with a guy like Jeff Stoutland, who also works with the tight ends as far as blocking technique. Jason Michael's done a great job as well. So leaning like a guy like Dallas Goedert, if he is still in Philadelphia, which he probably should be, but regardless, he'll be able to teach him. Obviously, he's a great blocker as well. So there are the tools necessary in Philadelphia. He'd be reunited with his former head coach. So I think it'll be a perfect situation for him to land on and kind of excel in at the next level.
I definitely like the idea of if it's a possibility. You talked about it a good ways. You don't have to draft super early necessarily, but you wonder kind of where he might fall. And you like the idea of, hey, you have extra insight on a player that can be a weapon, was a weapon in college. Curious, of what element he might play if he gets on this roster. But going back to Scott Loeffler real quick, and also Frazier, Parks Frazier with the pass game coordination. People have been, talking the speculation, this constant, theme of, okay, Kevin Patullo, he's the offensive coordinator, not having called plays before. Who is the pass game coordinator going to be? Who's the quarterback coach? We have that solidified now. So we do have those two guys. Scott Loeffler bringing in, you did talk about too. There's a lot of elements of where Harold Fannin got used, but talk to me a little bit more. You had a great tweet of the reasons that this could be positive, and certainly the future plans potentially for the Eagles. But why is this maybe even better than some people realize to have both of those guys in those roles, being Scott Loeffler and Parks Frazier?
So when it was announced that the Eagles were going to be losing both Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier, it kind of just felt like they were going to be left in the dust, whereas like they didn't really have anybody to kind of bring up besides Kevin Patullo. Like once they made that move, who was really behind them in the future, where as if Kevin Patullo moved on or if things didn't work out, they need to have somebody kind of working behind him, getting acclimated in Philadelphia to create kind of this offensive coordinator pipeline. Because before you saw how Shane Steichen left and they just brought Brian Johnson in. Obviously that didn't pan out as expected, but the offense still wasn't terrible. They were still top 10 in a lot of categories. It just didn't work out schematically, situationally. Obviously the defense didn't help. So now the fact that they kind of rebuilt it and they have Parks Frazier, who did have familiarity with the current coaching staff, but now they bring in a guy that really doesn't have any familiarity. He worked with Aaron Moorhead for a couple seasons in college, but besides that, he's basically brand new to a lot of these guys. And he has almost 30 years of experience, mostly coaching in college. Of course, he had 1 year in the NFL, but look at who he's worked with. He's worked with Tom Brady at Michigan. He's worked with Tim Tebow at Florida. He's worked with Logan Thomas, all different types of different quarterbacks, body style systems. Obviously, what he did with Bowling Green, kind of turning that program around, where they had 3 bowl game appearances. I mean, now they kind of rebuilt this offensive coordinator pipeline to where whatever happens with Kevin Patullo, they can kind of bounce ideas off each other as well with Kevin Patullo, because he has over almost 15 years of calling play experience in college. So it's just a great situation for Philadelphia to have. They're not bringing in guys like in 2023 where they were college coaches, but they had 4 or 5 years of college coaching experience, only specific positions. Like this guy's been all over the place. So it's a great addition to Philadelphia's coaching staff, and I'm really inspired by what they've done this offseason.
Yeah, it's not the same. I know maybe the tendency, the thought is to go there and be like, "Wow, this is 2023," because you don't have as much. But we've kind of continued to say this. Same thing with Kevin Patullo. These other guys getting into the roles, they still have a lot more experience, and be it in other types of positions, other organizations, other teams, even other levels, like you're talking about there with college ranks. But it's a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge that they can bring that you didn't have as much for 2023. So I'm very curious and very interested. I was watching some mic'd up clips earlier in this video. I shared kind of a portion from a Bowling Green practice, but from what I've seen, what I've heard, I've appreciated it. If anything, the only negative I would say from Scott Loeffler is the fact that he's not Italian. For what I know, I can't, I guess 100%, but from what I know, he's not Italian, and we didn't get Nunzio Campanelli, which was the other rumored, potential for the quarterback coach.
Some great tweets in response to that. I loved it. It was so funny.
For people that said that it was going to stick with the Italian theme, of course, Sirianni, Patullo, Campanelli, if he had gotten that associate head coach of Syracuse. He did not, of course. But yeah, I'm very excited. You pointed that out first place that I saw it of following Honest NFL. But his comments too are like, look, if you don't know anything, just the fact that Honest NFL is tweeting out about it, saying the guy's schemes, the way he sees the game, the way that he calls plays, is fantastic news for Eagles fans. So I'm very optimistic. All things considered, going to be with Jalen, hopefully a long-term future, regardless of where that's at in terms of positional coach or if he moves up the ranks. But I think it's really positive.
Yeah, and another guy that I really respect, Tommy Lawler, who had an Eagles blog for feels like as long as I've been an adult, but he also commented on like the Bowling Green offense and what he saw when they played Penn State last season, how impressed he was with their passing concepts and things like that. So I'm just really excited to see what he brings to Philadelphia and how they all can kind of have this melting pot that Kevin Patullo can kind of stir up and decide what he pulls out of there.
There we go. Now, as far as, those guys coming into Philly, new faces, but still, nonetheless, the other side of this, and lots of rumors that happen naturally getting close to free agency, and you have the combine, which, go figure, GMs, agents, players, everything else there. There's going to be rumors and leaks and made up stories perhaps for things that are not there. But the big news, Zack Baun, Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, who's going to be back, who's not. Diana Russini was recording on Scoop City with Chase Daniels, and the clip that's basically gone everywhere at this point, but talking about how, hey, Myles Garrett, legit possibility, Howie Roseman may go out and do that, but does that keep others from not coming back to the Eagles? the natural thought, I think, is like, okay, is that Zack Baun? Because I saw a lot of people go, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is going to be terrible news for us. But maybe not so much, right? Like not Zack Baun, others potentially, but Zack Baun is not as much worry whenever you see that clip.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you go back and actually look at the clip that they shared on social media, the first two people that pop up as Diana Russini is talking is Milton Williams and Josh Sweat. And then Chase Daniel mentioned Zack Baun, and that's when he pops up. So it seems like, I mean, based on what we've been saying for weeks now, it feels like if any of those, I guess, core four, you would say like Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Zack Baun, and Mekhi Becton, it seemed like Milton Williams and Josh Sweat were the two that were kind of trending in the direction of leaving Philadelphia, kind of chasing the money that they rightfully earn. I'm not going to knock anybody for getting their bag, but at the same time, every other report has kind of claimed that even Jeff McClain and others have said that Zack Baun is going to be a priority for Philadelphia. So I don't necessarily think, and I tweeted this as well, I don't think that necessarily trading for Myles Garrett means that they can't bring back Zack Baun. I mean, Myles Garrett only has 2 years left on his current contract, so I think wherever he does get traded to, he probably would either sign an extension or rework his existing deal. So I think the most likely scenario is if they do get Myles Garrett, that they would still bring back Zack Baun. I don't think one necessarily cancels out the other. So I see a lot of people panicking and saying it's Myles Garrett or any of the free agents. I just don't think that's how it would work. I think the Eagles understand how important Zack Baun is, and he's still number one for them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will go with like, not that you're necessarily wrong. Myles Garrett, Jalen Carter, scares and terrifies the entire NFL. Sure, is it very hard to stop? Yes, but in a Vic Fangio defense, we've said it so many times. The linebacker position is incredibly important. Now, Zack Baun turned out. Vic Fangio saw what he did. He realized that, and to the level that he played. But being the All-Pro, you don't let that guy out the door. Vic Fangio is going to make sure of it. I mean, I'm adamant that he's, hey, this is my guy. There's no reason to move on. As much as you may like Myles Garrett, got to have the linebacker play. And I think you mentioned it 2 or 3 weeks ago, whenever we were talking about this, but saying like you also have Nakobe Dean with the injury, coming off the injury. When will he be ready? Ben Van Sumeren injury, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who he played a couple sparing snaps and sparingly in snaps and things like that, but you can't ultimately rely on that. And then Oren Burks as well, but it's like, okay, are you going to bring him back? Is that the main goal there? But Zack Baun, that's where it starts. You've seen so many clips, hearing the other players talk about him. So I'm in agreement. I'm not concerned. I didn't see that and go, what the heck? But it's just more so, I think Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, as you're saying. Although there was a cryptic post from Josh Sweat. Sweaty had a little Instagram response that people have seen by now. But the 3 question marks when he was being referred to as unlikely to return to the Eagles. Who knows what that means? Is it Sweaty saying that he's going to return, or is it just in a weird roundabout way ends up maybe meaning that he is actually gone?
I mean, it's hard to understand like what Josh Sweat does on social media, because this time last offseason is when seemed like he was saying goodbye, or at least hinting towards a goodbye in Philadelphia, but then he ended up reworking his deal and coming back. So maybe this means that he's definitely gone because he's saying he might return. Like this time, it's just like it's reverse psychology with Josh Sweat. But I think all signs kind of point. He changed agents right before free agency, like I said weeks ago. I think that's always a sign that players are going to kind of try and chase the money and see what they can get. And I feel like he already did his favor to the Eagles by reworking his deal and sticking around for one more year. So now he's kind of earned the right to hit the open market and get whatever he can. And I feel like he's going to get a lot of money. It seems like most of these websites have him ranked as one of, if not the best defensive free agent available. So if that's how they feel, it seems like a majority of the NFL needs edge rushers, that he's going to have a ton of interest. And the fact that just a couple of years ago or whenever coming out of the draft, we weren't even sure if he was ever going to play football again because of the way how bad his knee injury was in college. And there were so many questions about that. So the fact that he's now going to get a massive contract in free agency, it's a pretty cool full circle moment.
Definitely is. As you said, well-deserved. If he can go get his bag and he wants to do that, totally understand. If he wants to run it back with Philly and a little bit of discount, perhaps, something there, we're all for it. But the Eagles, just don't overpay, and I don't think that they will. So kind of potentially go in that route. New York, though, staying with the NFC East news, I don't know if necessarily overpay or just make the wrong move. They continue to do that, and it feels like they're going in that direction. The Aaron Rodgers to New York rumor has heated up. He's reached out to the Giants, and it sounds like they're trying to look at maybe getting something done. So it didn't work with the other New York team. You might as well bounce on over to the New York Giants. I mean, what do you think about that? It's just another dumpster fire, really.
I mean, this is exactly what they kind of got themselves into by keeping Joe Shane and Brian Dable around for another season, because now you have Joe Shane, who's essentially managing the team for this year and this year only, because he's basically like doing this for his job, to keep his job. So he just wants to win now, I guess, trying to make somewhat of a playoff push of some sort, which we all know doesn't seem possible. But I mean, nobody really saw Washington doing what they did as well in 1 year turnaround. So maybe it could happen. But at the same time, then now they immediately pivot to an ancient quarterback, essentially, who everybody's like, oh, but he had 28 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Like, he was good. It was the rest of the team that dragged him down. But then the year before that, they won more games with Zach Wilson starting. So it's just like, who really dragged who down? Because if you look at a lot of those games, Aaron Rodgers, especially in the first half of the season, he wasn't doing great, and he looked terrible under pressure. He really couldn't do anything. And then it was like almost like a Dak Prescott-esque performance, but in terms of the whole season, because like the second half of the season was now all of a sudden when he was throwing 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions when they were already eliminated from the playoffs. It's just like, if you look at it in the total, sure, it looks like he had great numbers, but if you go by game basis and actually watch him play, he really wasn't that impressive. But for some reason, my brother and several other Giants fans that I've spoken to, they are actually on board with this idea for as like a 1 year rental.
Are they really? Okay.
I don't know why. I'm trying to tell them this seems like the perfect chance to just sign a guy like Marcus Mariota or Justin Fields or whoever, where a guy that wouldn't mind starting 6 to 8 games and then kind of handing off the reins to a young quarterback. And it seems like the perfect transition. But for some reason, they want to bring in this guy that's shown that he doesn't want to teach anybody else. He pissed off Garrett Wilson in New York, and now who knows, maybe he'll get Malik Neighbors angry as well. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense. But like I said, this is kind of the bed that the Giants have made for themselves.
That is actually very surprising. So I'm sure there's both sides of it, absolutely, as there are for a lot of instances that the Giants do or the decision that they make. But I have a couple Giants friends who are totally against it, like for the reasons of you said.
So you know the smart ones. I got a couple dumb ones on my side. But.
Well, hey, sir, you could say that they're your family, I suppose. I'm not going to go there. But the fact that it's like all the reasons you mentioned, the locker room, the chemistry, the morale, the vibes, everything is like. No, I do not want Aaron Rodgers. If I'm the Giants or any team for that matter, I do not want Aaron Rodgers to be on my squad. Like, see you later, just retire, be done. You had a good career, but no, I don't think that it's going to work. If New York does it though, hey, you know what? More power to them. Hard knocks. So I mean, just keep going for it. You might as well just bring him back.
It's just I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, like I said, it seemed like the perfect like kind of off season to just do a full rebuild, like start a new GM, new head coach, new quarterback, everything perfectly aligned. You have a top 3 pick in the draft, but no, they want to keep the previous regime, now add a 40-plus-year-old quarterback. I just don't get it at all.
For whatever reason, yeah, it does not make sense. Really quickly, NFL news. I brought it up earlier in the video, but the Tush Push, the brotherly shove, I shouldn't say Tush Push, but that's the national phrase of it, so that's what I go with the first time, but I know that like lots of people, understandably. The brotherly shove, the quarterback sneak, no injuries. For those people that were saying player safety is paramount. We should outlaw this play for player safety. According to the study, no injuries from that play. It should be remaining, not banning the Tush Push. It's good news.
I mean, as it should be, right? Because it seems like I tweeted it out. I was like, this should be like the barometer of people that should be able to be a GM and a head coach in the NFL and those who shouldn't. It was just like, especially like a couple of guys are like, oh, the injury risk of this play. It's just like, it shouldn't be in the game. It's too much of an injury risk. And then literally the NFL the very next day themselves is like, actually, our studies say that there's no injuries at all. So you just don't know what you're talking about. So the fact that actually the league put this out and it's not like the Eagles put it out or some like private companies, like, no, the NFL said there's a 0.0% injury rate for this play. It's just like, because everybody was like, oh, Chris Jones got hurt on it. But he literally lined up like sideways. And it was like, here, hit me right in my neck. So like the fact that they try to use that as a reason for against the Tush Push, it was just insane. So I'm kind of happy that the NFL dropped the mic on that one.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciated that as well, because to your point, it's like if it had been somebody else, then okay, but to come back out and be like, yeah, it's zero. Like even if you were said it was a 2% injury rate, right? Like that's still phenomenal, but zero, like okay, point proven, no injuries there. It's gonna stay at least for a while. People are gonna complain about it regardless, but it's fine. We're good to go. Moving on though to the combine, because we talked about this last week. You gave several names to keep an eye on, so we've been watching, continue to monitor throughout the weekend. But we've had several combine takeaways and noteworthy guys that have stood out, whether just for NFL purposes or the Eagles. But you have a couple different names to run through from the standouts so far. So curious to get your takes there.
So I'm going to start with two guys that I actually mentioned the last time when we kind of previewed the combine. It was like two guys that I expected to have freakish performances, and sure enough, they did. And so that was Tennessee edge James Pierce Jr., who came in at 6'5", 245 pounds, so already great size. But then he ran a 4.47 40-yard dash, which is just absurd at that size. And he even had a hoodie on to make things worse. So even though the hoodie was the hood was flashing in the wind, it didn't slow him down at all. So
it slowed him down by like 0.05. You just shaved his time even better.
If he took that off, he might have ran a 4.3. Who knows? And then another guy that I talked about with South Carolina safety Nick Emanwari, another guy who we already knew he had freakish size, 6'3", 220 pounds, but 11-foot 6-inch broad jump, 43-inch vertical, and then topped it off with a 4.38 in the 40-yard dash, which is just ridiculous. Kind of confirmed himself as definitely a first-round pick. That likely is one of the top safeties in the draft.
That is insanity too. And I was looking at the broad jump, right? Like, so it's crazy his number. But if I'm not mistaken, second place was 10.10. So he's 11.6 as the first. Like that is lapping the field in the sense of like what that drill is, of how far ahead he is of second place. Yeah. You definitely called it, but I didn't even anticipate it to be that much of a difference. And then you think about the fact that, as we talk about, he's 6'3", 220. I mean, what team is not going like, please give me that safety. It's crazy.
Especially in like this positionless like age of football that we're going into, right? I mean, you see the success that the Eagles had with Cooper DeJean, where he was just like, yeah, he played on the outside, but he has this freakish athleticism, which he really didn't get to display because of an injury, but everybody knew the athlete that he was. And the Eagles were like, hey, we can put him in the slot. He's aggressive. He can tackle. And then look how it worked out. So he can kind of be, Emanwari can kind of be this year's Cooper DeJean as far as like that positionless player that can kind of do it all. And with his athleticism, his aggression, like that's a perfect player that you want in like today's NFL. So now two other guys that I didn't talk about last time, but also had impressive performances. Texas A&M edge, Shamar Stewart, who is a guy that's like one of those like traits over tape guys, because he has it all in terms of like his body. He's 6'5", 281. He had a 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump, 40-inch vertical jump, and a 4.59 in the 40-yard dash. But if you look at his stats, never really put up any crazy stats. So it's going to be interesting to see how NFL teams kind of weigh that, because he never had more than 1.5 sacks in a season. But we've seen players in the NFL like Jason Owe on the Ravens where he had very minimal college production, and then last season he had 10 sacks in one season. So you kind of have to weigh that and project the player moving forward. And then lastly,
sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, and similar, not the exact same, but similar thing for Nolan Smith. I mean, there's injuries, but we talked about like, man, intangibles, athleticism, crazy things like that, but you don't necessarily see it from the sack. So yes, very valid point. But then, I saw some people being like, well, A&M and his athleticism and then comparisons to Myles Garrett. Is this that's probably a little extreme, but it's not to say that this is a guy a team would draft and it's like, well, you're only going to get 1.5 sacks from him. So maybe somewhere in the middle of those.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle. But we live in the world of extremes. So
that's true. Yes,
he's the next Myles Garrett.
His player comp is Myles Garrett. There you go.
Yes. So unfortunately, it seems like all three of those guys that I already mentioned will probably be out of the Eagles' range at 32. But one guy that could be very viable at that spot is another edge player, Boston College, Donovan Ezeraku, who 6'2.5", 248 pounds, 34-inch arms, 35.5 vertical. So none of that's like too crazy, too outlandish. But he was the only edge rusher that participated in the 3-cone drill to hit under that 7-second mark. He was at 6.94 seconds. And that's kind of the golden rule as far as evaluating edge rushers and their success at the next level. A lot of the best guys in the league were able to run under 7 seconds in that 3-cone drill. And he was able to hit that mark. And he was already a guy that was talked about as a fringe first-round pick. So he is somebody that I would definitely look at 32 overall. New Jersey native as well. So he's definitely a guy I have my eyes on for the Eagles.
There we go. I love it. So all the extra takeaways. This is the point that you start to see draft boards change drastically because you get these numbers, you get these, metrics and everything else. And then you start to go back to the tape and say, okay, maybe this showed itself or maybe it didn't. Like there's some potential guys of, hey, they prove a little bit more athletic than what the tape showed, vice versa. But I'm excited because you begin to get full-on draft season. Of course, you have free agency first, but then you move on there. With free agency being a little bit over a week away, though, to wrap, I'm curious just to get your thoughts on what's next to come. What do you anticipate? We have continued to talk about Zack Baun and the other signings, but they said, according to the Inquirer, Jeff McClain and others, that Zack Baun is a priority to get signed before free agency. So, March 10th, legal tampering, March 12th, free agency. Do you anticipate the Eagles get it done? Percentage-wise, you feel like more likely than not of a Zack Baun signing this next coming week?
So I don't know if it's definitely going to be done before free agency, but if you ask me as far as is Zack Baun going to return to the Eagles, I'd probably put it at 90%, 95%. That's just how confident I am as far as I just think he's perfect for the Eagles. The Eagles know how valuable he is to them and for Vic Fangio's defense. I just think that deal has to get done. But one other thing I would watch for is a Cam Jurgens extension, or whether that's right when free agency opens or whenever the new league year starts, however they want to do it. But I think that's something that's going to be done. And I think despite that he has to go undergo the back procedure or whatever it is, but he's such an important player for that offensive line. He kind of proved how great he can be in his first season as a starting center in the NFL. So I think they'll try and lock him up and try and get ahead of the center market, like we saw Howie Roseman do with Landon Dickerson last offseason, right? A lot of people looked at that contract and they were like, whoa, that's a lot for a guard. And then now Trey Smith got franchise tagged at $3 million more per year. So it's just kind of Howie Roseman continued. He did it with Jordan Mailata. He did it with Lane Johnson. He just constantly kind of gets ahead of the market. So I would look for him to do that with Cam Jurgens as well. And then another thing, probably my favorite part of this kind of draft season, is we're going to start seeing some top 30 visits reported. That usually gets scheduled at the combine. So we should see some of those pop up as well.
There we go. Those will be very exciting. And as always, we say this just about every recording, but certainly as we get closer to the draft, those are very telling because of the top 30 visits, what it means in particular to the Eagles, but a lot of teams, but certainly for Howie Roseman. So make sure to, as always, as I've said, but if you have not, make sure to follow Anthony at DeBone NFL. I've got the link in the description, access to articles, content, everything there, but also following along for the visits. And Anthony, this was a blast as always, but I know, like you said too, we get into mock drafts meaning a little bit more now, so we're getting there. Probably some, potentially, we're talking about this, but live stream coming up where we'll get a mock draft going, so people will be on the lookout for that. But thanks for coming on as always.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk, and make sure to check out my draft meeting tracker that have over 50 prospects on now that I'll constantly be updating as kind of meetings are reported with top 30 visits at the combine, all-star games, all that stuff will be in there. So if you want to keep up with that, that'll be updated as often as possible throughout the day.
There we go. It's my go-to. So I appreciate it because, I don't see too many people. There's some that you see here and there, but for the Eagles, it's kind of the go-to. It's like, okay, I just need a one-stop shop. Who have they met with? At what level? And everything else. So, people go check it out. Don't miss out on it. And also let us know in the comments your thoughts on this, takeaways from the combine, what's coming up for free agency, everything else. And as always, of course, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, we appreciate you guys. Go Birds.